In 1987, two men found a glowing blue powder inside a stolen metal capsule. They thought they had found something magical. Within days, it had killed a 6-year-old girl who never touched a weapon, never entered a laboratory, and never knew what was in her hands. Before it was over, it would contaminate 249 people, force the demolition of entire homes, and turn a neighborhood into thousands of tons of radioactive waste. And the most disturbing part of this story is not how it happened. It is how easily it could happen again, anywhere on Earth, including near you. The city was Goiania, Brazil. And this is the story of how a beautiful light burned through a neighborhood. It begins with an empty building. A private cancer clinic in the center of the city had been treating patients for years with a machine called a teletherapy unit. Inside that machine, behind heavy shielding, sat a canister of cesium-137. In a hospital, in trained hands, that canister is medicine. It fires a controlled beam of radiation into a tumor and destroys it. It saves lives. But in 1985, the clinic moved to a new location, and they left the machine behind. What followed was one of the most ordinary disasters in human history. Not sabotage, not terrorism, a dispute about paperwork. The clinic said the building's owners would not let them remove the machine. The owners said it was not their responsibility. A court got involved. A court-appointed guard was posted at the site. Officials sent warnings. Letters were written. And while adults argued about liability, the building itself was falling apart. The roof partially collapsed. The doors stood open. The rain came in. For 2 years, one of the most dangerous objects in the city sat inside a ruin, and the only thing protecting the public from it was a single guard who did not show up every day. One afternoon in September of 1987, he did not show up. That day, 2 men walked into the ruined clinic looking for scrap metal to sell. Their names were Roberto and Wagner. They were not criminals in any serious sense. They were poor men in a poor part of a city, and metal was worth money. They found the machine, and they thought they had struck gold. It was huge, and it was heavy, and it was full of steel and lead. They took it apart with their bare hands, loaded the heaviest section into a wheelbarrow, and pushed it through the streets of Goiania to a backyard. They worked on it for days. Both of them began to vomit. One of them assumed it was something he ate. Buried inside the assembly was a metal capsule, roughly the size of a fist. It was designed to be nearly indestructible. It was designed so that no one could ever open it. They punctured it with a screwdriver, and in the darkness of that backyard, the powder inside began to glow, a deep, hypnotic blue. Now, understand what they were actually looking at. That glow was not paint. It was not phosphorus. It was the cesium itself, so intensely radioactive that it was making its own light. The blue came from the salt glowing under the force of its own decay. Every second they stared at it, it was firing radiation into their bodies. But they did not know that. Nobody had ever told them such a thing could exist. To them, it looked like treasure. It looked like something from another world. They thought it might be valuable. They wondered if it was supernatural, so they shared it. The capsule was sold to a nearby scrapyard, owned by a man named De Vere. And when De Vere saw the glow, he did something that changed everything. He did not sell it. He brought it into his house. He invited his friends. He invited his family. He invited the neighborhood. For days, people came to look at the miracle in the scrapyard owner's home. Guests were given fragments to take away with them. Some rubbed the powder on their skin, so they would shine in the dark like something holy. One man carried a piece in his shirt pocket for days. Another put it under his bed. Children were given some to play with. De Vere's wife, Maria Gabriela, watched this happen in her own house. And then came September 24th. De Vere's brother had taken some of the powder home to show his family. His 6-year-old daughter, Leda, was fascinated by it. She sat down at the kitchen table for lunch, an egg sandwich, and the blue dust was spread out across the table beside her plate like scattered sugar. She ate with her hands. That single meal delivered a dose of radiation into her body that no medicine on Earth could reverse. Within days, the neighborhood was falling ill. Vomiting, dizziness, hair falling out, strange burns appearing on hands and shoulders, on skin that had touched nothing hot. Doctors examined them and reached the obvious conclusion: some tropical disease, a bad food reaction. Several of the sick were sent home to rest, carrying the contamination with them. For 2 weeks, the invisible thing moved through Goiania, and nobody knew what it was, except one person. Maria Gabriela Ferreira had been paying attention. She noticed something the doctors had missed. It was not spreading like a disease at all. Everyone who was sick had one thing in common. They had been inside her house. They had stood near the glow. So Maria Gabriela did something extraordinary. She went into the yard and she gathered up what remained of the capsule. She put it into a plastic bag, and then she boarded a public bus and rode across the city with the most radioactive object in Brazil sitting on her lap in order to hand it to the health department herself. Think about that bus. Ordinary people going home from work, someone reading a newspaper, and a woman sitting quietly with a bag in her lap, carrying an invisible fire. At the health department, a physicist was called. He looked at the material, and he understood instantly what he was seeing. He ordered the site evacuated. He raised the alarm. Maria Gabriela had ended the disaster with her own hands. She died from the dose she absorbed doing it. What followed was one of the largest radiological cleanups in history. Investigators fanned out across the city with detectors and began to trace the invisible trail. They found contamination in homes, in a bus, in money that had passed from hand to hand. It had traveled through the city on shoes, on hands, on paper. More than 100,000 people lined up to be checked. 249 were contaminated. Some had it inside their bodies. Entire houses were torn down. The topsoil of whole neighborhoods was scraped from the earth and buried. Furniture, clothing, toys, and soil, all of it sealed away as radioactive waste. Thousands of tons of it from a source small enough to hold in one hand. 4 people died. Dever's brother, his wife, a young employee of the scrapyard, 19 years old, and Leda, the 6-year-old girl. And what happened next is the part of this story that says the most about human fear. Leda was buried in a coffin lined with lead, and when her funeral procession arrived at the cemetery, a crowd was waiting for it. Hundreds of people, shouting, terrified that the child's body would poison their city and their ground. They threw stones at the funeral of a 6-year-old girl. She was buried anyway. And in the years that followed, some of the survivors of Goiania found they could not get jobs. Their neighbors would not sit beside them. Hotels in other cities refused to accept anyone from Goiania. Farmers in the region could not sell their crops, even from land the disaster never touched. The radiation harmed hundreds of people. The fear of it harmed 100,000 more. Today, the waste from Goiania sits sealed in concrete on the outskirts of the city, and it will remain dangerous for centuries. Cesium-137 has a half-life of about 30 years. Nearly 40 years have passed since that summer, which means more than a third of that radioactivity is still there, right now, sitting under the concrete. But here is the part of this story that should keep you awake. The source that did all of this was not stolen from a weapons program. It was not smuggled out of a reactor. It was left behind in an empty building because nobody could agree who was responsible for locking the door. And that source was not unique. There are tens of thousands of powerful radioactive sources in use around the world right now. In hospitals, in factories, in oil fields, sterilizing equipment, inspecting welds. They are inside machines that will eventually get old and be replaced and be forgotten. Every year, sources like these are lost, abandoned, or stolen. Most are recovered. Some are not. The atomic energy agencies have a name for them. They call them Orphan Sources. Somewhere on this planet, right now, one of them is sitting in a scrapyard, or a storeroom, or a warehouse that changed owners twice and lost its paperwork. It is waiting for someone who does not know what it is, someone who will open it and see the light.